Zane Smith is a potential candidate to drive for Stewart-Haas Racing in 2024. 2311 Racing, right runner, third car, more race in 2023 for Kurt Busch, potentially if Kurt Busch is medically cleared. And there are no penalties for the fight between Noah Gragson and Ross Chastain. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead by starting talking about all the throwback schemes that have been revealed over the last couple of days. And trust me, there have been a lot that have been revealed. The first throwback we're taking a look at is Riley Herbst's throwback and tribute scheme to Ken Block. This is definitely one of my favorite throwbacks that has been revealed so far. This is absolutely amazing. A lot of the Monster Energy is changing up their colors to honor Ken Block. Looks amazing and looks absolutely incredible. The next throwback we're taking a look at is Dawson Cram's throwback to Bob Keselowski. This looks really good in my opinion. Really happy to see that they're honoring Bob Keselowski. A really good looking tribute scheme. Excited to see it out on the racetrack. The next throwback we're taking a look at is Kyle Larson's throwback to Tony Stewart's 2009 car that he ran at Daytona that he won it in the number 80 car. This looks absolutely amazing and probably one of my personal favorite throwbacks so far in 2023. It's accurate, it looks amazing, looks incredible. I'm excited to see this one out on the racetrack. The next throwback we're taking a look at is Ryan Newman's throwback to his car from, I believe, 2002 or 2003. Brian Newman, of course, making his return to the NASCAR Cup Series this weekend at Darlington. This is definitely one of my favorite throwbacks so far that has been revealed. It's accurate, it looks amazing, and Ricker Racing did a fantastic and incredible job. It looks really amazing. The next throwback we're taking a look at is Ty Dillon's throwback to Joe Lee Johnson. This looks pretty solid in my opinion. I think Spire Motorsports did a really solid and a pretty good job on this. I'm definitely looking forward to see it out on the racetrack this weekend at Darlington. The next throwback we're taking a look at is Corey LaJoie's throwback to his grandfather, Don LaJoie. Looks awesome in my opinion. Looks pretty good, and I'm definitely looking forward to see it out on the racetrack this weekend at Darlington. The next throwback we're taking a look at is Anthony Alfredo's throwback to Dale Jr.'s 2017 scheme. This is, I believe, going to be the newest throwback of all the throwbacks besides the one that Kyle Busch is going to be running. But this looks amazing, and Lefty did a fantastic job on this Anthony Alfredo throwback that we're going to see in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. I love it. It's amazing. It's exciting. I'm looking forward to see it out on the racetrack at Darlington. The next throwback we're taking a look at is Brad Keselowski's throwback to old Castrol colors. This is decent in my opinion. It's not perfect. It's not fantastic, but I do think it's decent, and hopefully Brad Keselowski can have a good run in this car this weekend at Darlington. And a final throwback as of now we're taking a look at is Joe Graf Jr.'s throwback to himself, Joe Graf Jr. Interesting that Joe Graf Jr. really hasn't had a lot of success in NASCAR at this point, is doing a throwback to himself. But honestly, I think it looks decent. It looks pretty solid, and hopefully he'll have a good run in this car this weekend with RSS Racing. We'll see what happens, though. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Yin Ramen Bar. As it was announced yesterday that Yin Yang Ramen Bar was partnered up with Kyle Larson for 2024. This is a really good company. Glad to see that Kyle Larson does basically have a new sponsor coming in for 2024. It's amazing to see this, and I think it's really cool that Larson gets new partners. I don't think it'll be basically a sponsor. Basically, it's like a new company's going to be on his fire suit, which I think is really awesome. I think that's pretty cool that they're doing that, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Kyle Petty, Bobby Labonte, Dale Jarrett, and Jeff Burton. As it was announced that all four individuals have been named Grand Marshals for the Coca-Cola 600. All four of those individuals were part of the Coca-Cola Racing family at some point, and all four drivers have been contenders, I believe, to win the Coca-Cola 600. Both of them have actually won the Coca-Cola 600 as well, and four of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time. So congratulations to all four of them being named Grand Marshals. I think they'll do a really solid job in that, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Kevin Harvick and Joey Logano. As NASCAR, of course, over the last few weeks has been unveiling all the drivers that are going to be part of the top 75 greatest NASCAR drivers of all time. And over the last couple of days, Kevin Harvick and Joey Logano have been officially announced to be the next two to be added to the top 75 greatest NASCAR drivers. Kevin Harvick, Joey Logano, no-brainers. Joey Logano already a two-time NASCAR Cup Series champion, won over 30 NASCAR Cup Series races in his career, has won a lot of iconic races. Not a big surprise. Kevin Harvick, one of the top 10 greatest NASCAR drivers of all time, in my opinion. Probably one of the most underrated NASCAR drivers ever. Kevin Harvick's won over 60 NASCAR Cup Series races and is one of the most successful drivers in the sport. So congratulations to both of them on getting inducted into the top 75 drivers, as they have both earned the right to be in the top 75 greatest NASCAR drivers. In my honest opinion, congratulations to both of them. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Ross Chastain. As it was announced yesterday that Ross Chastain is going to drive the 91 for DGM Racing this weekend at Darlington in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Ross Chastain, of course, also be racing against Carson Hocevar, which he's been giving advice to Carson Hocevar. But I think Ross Chastain will have a pretty decent run. He's had some decent runs with DGM Racing, but they're not the fastest organization in the world. So I'm not predicting Ross Chastain is going to win, but I think he'll contend for maybe a top 5 or top 10 with DGM Racing. He can get the best out of the equipment, and nonetheless, I think that Ross Chastain will have a pretty solid run this weekend at Darlington. I'm looking forward to seeing him out on the racetrack in Xfinity, and I think he'll have a pretty decent run this weekend at Darlington. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about the ASA North Wilkesboro entry list, as there's going to be an all-star race for late models at North Wilkesboro, and there's a lot of people that are on this entry list. Notable drivers include William Sawalich, Eric Jones, Johnny Sauter, Derek Thorne, Chase Elliott, Derek Kraus, Derek Griffith, Carson Hocevar, Sammy Smith, Mason Diaz, Chandler Smith, Bubba Pollard, Noah Gragson, Grant Enfinger, Casey Roderick's on the list, Connor Jones, Jake Finch, Steven Nass, Ty Majeski, Daniel Suarez, Ross Chastain, and Brad Keselowski will all compete in this ASA event. There's about 50 people that are going to be on the interest for this event. There's just a lot of really awesome drivers. Mainly Chase Elliott's the biggest star on this list, and I think Chase Elliott will absolutely be a contender in this event. He's always been really good at late model racing. He's also won the Snowball Derby in the past as well, though it's been many years since he has won the Snowball Derby. But I think this is really cool to see that they're doing this, and I love that this All-Star Race is going to be a huge thing. I wish it was broadcasted on TV, because I think it would be really, really huge TV ratings. Nonetheless, so it's pretty cool to see that all the drivers have been inducted and are going to be, not inducted, but all going to be part of the race. I think it's going to be really exciting to see, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Now, for the last few years, Indianapolis Motor Speedway has not had the blackout. Well, the Geoforce blackout that used to be at Indianapolis Motor Speedway is going to be returning in 2023. For those who do not know, the blackout quintessentially is where all people in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway area or in the surrounding area basically will not be able to watch the race, because they want as many people to show up to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Here's my problem with that. You're probably going to end up selling out at Indianapolis Motor Speedway from people that are out of Indianapolis. You're going to be punishing a lot of people and not allowing a lot of people to get a shot and an opportunity to watch Indy 500 who are in the Indianapolis area. And I don't like this move, in my opinion. I think this is a really, really bad move. This is not the 2000s anymore. This is 2023. So I expect a lot of VPNs to show up, a lot of illegal streams to come into play for people to watch the event. Personally, I'm not a big fan of this move. I think this is kind of stupid on the Indianapolis part. I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to get people to show up to the race, right? Here's the problem. You're going to have a lot of fans that are frustrated and upset by this move. I just personally am not a huge fan of the Geo block. I think it's a bad move, and I think it's overall a bad decision. But that is just my honest opinion. I think this is a pretty bad decision overall, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Alex Bowman. As it was officially announced on Wednesday afternoon, reported by Joseph Wrigley, that Alex Bowman will not be running the Truck Series race at North Wilkesboro. Now, the number 7 truck for Spire Motorsports is still expected to run this event at North Wilkesboro, but has not been announced who will be behind the wheel. This is not a surprise. It sounds like Alex Bowman will not be racing at North Wilkesboro completely at all at the time, because remember, Alex Bowman is still currently out due to an injury that he suffered after a sprint car accident, and he still has not been known when he will return. A lot of people think it could be the Coca-Cola 600, so that's why he's not racing at North Wilkesboro. Now, he could run the Cup race in North Wilkesboro, but it sounds like at this particular point that he will not return until after the North Wilkesboro weekend. So it's a barely fulfilled decision, as I think Bowman would love to race in North Wilkesboro, so he'll probably be there in attendance by the point, but he will not be behind the wheel. That being said, the question will be who will be behind the wheel of that number 7 truck. I would imagine someone maybe see Kyle Larson or Chase behind the wheel of that truck. That's my guess at this particular point. It's going to be nonetheless interesting to see what happens, and we'll watch and see what happens going forward in regards to that. Definitely something to keep an eye on for sure, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Formula E. Now, there were rumors and rumors back in the beginning of the year that Formula E could have actually been working with NASCAR to have racing at the Chicago Street Course on the same weekend as NASCAR. So Formula E and NASCAR working together. According to Adam Stern, Formula E co-founder confirmed that informal talks had also taken place with the Chicago Street Race, which will be used for a NASCAR round in July. But that this was shelved because Formula E didn't want to effectively clear up with NASCAR in date terms. That's a little bit disappointing. That would have been really, really cool to see Formula E race in the streets of Chicago at the same time as NASCAR. There's a lot of big superstars in Formula E, and while Formula E, I don't think the racing is always the greatest in the world, and also I don't think Formula E is the most coolest thing in the world, it still would have been pretty cool to see another racing series pair up. Obviously, IMSA is going to be the series that is going to be pairing up with NASCAR. I believe the GT series is going to be there on that same weekend. Well, actually, no, they're not going to be part of it, which is why the Xfinity series and the Cup series are going to be happening. So there'll be only 2 events happening, which is a little disappointing. I would love to see maybe some lower series come into play, maybe motorcycle racing or something like that come into play for the event. But it's interesting to hear that Formula E was interested in maybe making a move and coming over and joining NASCAR on the same weekend. It would have been definitely very interesting to watch and definitely something very interesting to see. So nonetheless, something interesting for sure. It would have been really, really cool, but I'm not entirely shocked or surprised that quintessentially they decided to go ahead and not have the race on the same weekend. It's not a surprise and not a shock, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ross Chastain and Noah Gragson. Now, we're going to be talking about the fight a little bit later in just a little bit, but we're going to talk about engagements. Because according to Adam Stern, he reported this on Wednesday afternoon that Ross Chastain and Noah Gragson drove more Twitter engagements combined during and after the Cup race than the next 23 drivers combined. According to the reports, Ross Chastain and Noah Gragson, according to Zoom, did 138,000 engagements with just both drivers. With everybody else, including Denny Hamlin, every of the 23 drivers combined had 138,000, with Denny Hamlin having the most of around 28 or 30,000, if I'm not mistaken, from the report. Ross Chastain and Noah Gragson are drawing a lot of headlines, and a lot of it is due to the fight that ended up taking place. So I'm really not surprised to see Twitter engage because everybody in the industry was talking about it, and not just in the NASCAR industry was talking about it, but you had a lot of people outside the NASCAR industry who were talking about this fight as well. It was a really, really huge deal for the sport. You had a major media publications talking about it, and overall, it doesn't surprise or shock me that this is going on and that this was happening. So not really surprised by this, but again, it is really cool seeing NASCAR needs to basically get on it and try to promote Ross Chastain a lot more because it could be really, really huge and major for the sport. And nonetheless, I really hope that they can start promoting it a lot more because I think it would be really huge for the sport if they decide to promote Ross Chastain a lot more. Hopefully, they start promoting Ross Chastain quite a bit more. Hopefully, they start doing that. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the Kansas and Miami TV ratings. So every single week we have ratings that come out from Adam Stern, and we have the F1 and NASCAR ratings we're going to talk about at the same time because remember, the Miami Grand Prix and the NASCAR Cup Series race at Kansas were basically going on at exactly the same time. So according to Adam Stern, FS1 earned a 1.35 rating and 2.352 million viewers for the Cup race at Kansas. If I'm not mistaken, that is up 1% from last year's race that took place. And remember, last year, Darlington was on the same weekend as Kansas was, and Kansas would have been this weekend that we're going to, and Darlington, of course, is this weekend. For Formula One, they earned a 0.9 rating and 1.646 million viewers. For Miami, that includes all the pre-race festivities. According to the report that came out later, they had a 1.96 million viewers, which at Formula One, that is down 400,000 viewers. Let's talk about the ratings a little bit and talk about it. Number one, the Cup Series, once again, up very, very slightly, which is a really good thing. I believe this is now the 4th consecutive race on the NASCAR Cup Series circuit that has now basically been up in TV ratings, which I think is a huge, huge positive. For Formula One, Even though they still had their second most watched race in the United States, they were still down over 400,000 viewers. That is not a really good thing to see because, if, in my opinion, Formula One has been growing in the United States, but I feel like the novelty of Formula One in the U.S., even though they have a lot of younger fans, I feel like the novelty of Formula One in the U.S. is going to start dying off unless people are going to start watching. And the biggest problem is the product. The racing product has not been good. Drivers have been complaining over the weekend and stuff, and I think that's a huge problem, especially for Formula One. I think that's one thing that's going to hurt Formula One in the long run in the United States, and I think eventually we might see Formula One lose some of their dates in the U.S. simply because of this reason. It is disappointing, but I think it's a really hard truth that has to come out, and it's really sad to see that. But NASCAR beats Formula One once again, not in the main demographic that they're looking at, but still, it is disappointing to see nonetheless that Formula One has lost a lot of their fans and a lot of their ratings. Disappointing stuff, but not really shocked by the news and not really shocked by this, in my opinion. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. As Denny Hamlin was on his Actions Detrimental podcast and he spoke on the last lap with Kyle Larson. He went in basically in detail saying the first couple times he could have taken a really big shot and an opportunity getting to Kyle Larson, and he didn't. He wanted to race him really, really clean. And then he said on the last lap, he said he was going to go for it. And Kyle Larson, he said, got into the outside wall a couple of times, and then Denny basically had nowhere to go, was going full sended. He accidentally got into Kyle Larson, and Larson got into the outside wall. However, Kyle Larson had come down on Denny Hamlin, and that's what was going on right there. Look, as much as many of you know, I am a big, really huge Kyle Larson fan, and Kyle Larson is my favorite driver. Denny Hamlin did not intentionally wreck Kyle Larson because Kyle Larson got on the outside wall multiple different times. And let's be honest with ourselves. Who had a better car at the time? I think Denny Hamlin personally had a better car than Kyle Larson at that point in the race. And it's disappointing because, like I said, I am a really huge Kyle Larson fan. So I was mad for a few seconds what happened there. But after seeing the replay and stuff, Denny Hamlin did not intentionally wreck Kyle Larson. From the angle from the replay, it looked like Denny Hamlin intentionally got into Kyle Larson. And maybe Denny did make a little contact. But I don't think Denny Hamlin wanted to intentionally wreck Kyle Larson. They're both going for the win. They both do respect each other quite a bit. And I really don't personally have a problem because, again, they're racing for a victory. And as much as we all may not like Denny Hamlin for making moves going for the win, Denny Hamlin is a race car driver. And he's going out there and racing for victories. And that's what he's supposed to do as a race car driver, is supposed to go and race for victory. So while many of us probably disagree with the move that Denny Hamlin made, you have to respect the decisions that Denny Hamlin made, and nonetheless, I have really no major issues with the way Denny Hamlin raced Kyle Larson because he is going for a victory. And now we're going ahead and on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Martin Truex Jr. Now, Martin Truex Jr. over the weekend basically revealed some details in regards to potentially when he could make an announcement in regards if he's going to return in 2024 or if he's going to retire. And according to Austin Kensky from Sportsnet, Martin Truex Jr. reveals that it could be by the end of the June. He could make a decision if he's going to retire at the end of 2023 or come back in 2024. And he said that because Bob Pockets basically said that, and because he asked Martin Truex Jr. on that, if that win at Dover really was going to play a role in helping him out. And Martin Truex Jr. basically kind of laughed and made a joke saying that the decision may not come till the end of June. Sounds like it's going to be basically similar to last year, where Martin Truex Jr. Remember last year where there were a lot of rumors that Martin Truex Jr. was going to retire at the end of 2022 and not race in 2023. But then basically he was blunt at the National Media Center and basically said, yep, I'm returning officially in 2023. So there is definitely a chance that Martin Truex Jr. could return in the 2024 season. And Joe Gibbs really does want to keep Martin Truex Jr. around for the long term, because Martin Truex Jr. is a really, really good driver still, and he's been really good the last few weeks, especially. And I think Martin Truex Jr. definitely, if he can start winning a lot more races, I think he could be a championship contender this year in the 2023 season. Joe Gibbs really wants to keep him around, and personally, if I'm Joe Gibbs right now, I want to do my best to try to keep Martin Truex Jr. in the Cup Series field and keep him on my team for as long as possible. I really hope that we get to see Martin Truex Jr. stay around for at least a foreseeable future and a long-term future. And nonetheless, I think there's a chance he could return in 2024. If you're that team, you want him to keep him around. But if he decides to go ahead and retire, it is what it is. But I think there's definitely a really strong shot and a really good possibility that he could retire at the end of 2023 and not race in 2024. But we're definitely going to have to wait and see what happens in regards to that. But it sounds like a decision could be coming not too far down the road. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin and 2311 Racing. As was reported over the weekend by Bob Pockrass and multiple other reporters, that Denny Hamlin and 2311 Racing are both working on their contract extensions with Toyota and Joe Gibbs Racing. Obviously, very interesting. We know that Denny Hamlin, he's currently in a contract year with Joe Gibbs Racing. But what's interesting to me is the fact that 2311 Racing, they're on a contract year with Toyota as well. And the biggest reason is because Denny Hamlin is a Toyota driver, and of course, he drives for Joe Gibbs Racing. If Denny Hamlin is to extend with Joe Gibbs Racing, which it sounds like from what we hear, it sounds like Denny Hamlin is likely going to sign a multi-year extension with Joe Gibbs Racing and probably finish his career driving for Joe Gibbs Racing. But that's very interesting to me, the 2311 Racing. They're also in a different position when it comes to that. It's going to be definitely interesting to watch. I personally do believe that Denny Hamlin and 2311 Racing are going to get extensions. They say it's going to take some time. I personally do not think it's going to take forever for them to get that deal done. I believe that sometime by the end, maybe of the next couple months, maybe by the time we get to the off week, they will have a decision made, or maybe a little bit later in the season. But with the fact that they haven't signed yet, it makes people think it's very similar to the Kyle Busch situation. When Kyle Busch, he had not signed his extension, and it hurt a lot of things, and it kind of changed the pipeline, changed the sport quite a bit. But things were a lot different. I think Joe really does want to keep Denny Hamlin around. Remember, though, FedEx is not going to likely be sponsored. There's a lot of rumors that FedEx might potentially be leaving at the end of the year, though they could return in 2024. But FedEx is heavily rumored to be out of the sport at the end of this season. It's definitely going to be very interesting to watch and see what happens in regards to that. Nonetheless, so we're here for it, and when that does get announced, regardless of what the decision is, whether it is Denny Hamlin returning to Joe Gibbs Racing or leaving, we'll have to keep an eye on it. But if you want my honest opinion, I do personally believe that they are going to get an extension, and I expect an extension to be done in the foreseeable future and not too far down the road. I think a decision is going to be coming here not too far down the road. I expect a decision in the not-so-distant future, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about North Wilkesboro. As Adam Stern put out a tweet yesterday, and according to him, the North Wilkesboro All-Star Race is being pointed to as a proof that NASCAR is intending on servicing its core base as much as it's seeking new fans. And he also notes that NASCAR is open to the possibility of a future points race there, but wants to see how the All-Star race goes first. Obviously, North Wilkesboro is making its official return for the first time since 1996 with the All-Star Race, and the Truck Series will have its first points-paying race at North Wilkesboro since the 1996 season. This event has been really, really huge, and there's a lot of really great festivities. We talked about the All-Star Race, basically going to be an All-Star Race for the late models, and also a huge event overall as well. And basically, the drivers have been really excited about this event as well. You look at what the drivers have said. They were getting 2 to 3 seconds of tire fall off, which that's going to create some really awesome tire strategy, and I think that's going to play a huge factor into racing as well. And I think that the race this year especially is going to be very similar to the race at Richmond. And Richmond, in my opinion, was one of the best races we have seen so far in the 2023 season. So I think it will still be a very good and really awesome race. Now, the big key and the big question in regards to North Wilkesboro is, do I think it will return in 2024 for a points-paying race? I think that there's a very strong chance and possibility that that is going to end up happening, and I think that they will end up having that in the 2024 season. I think they will have a future points-paying race. I think that's going to actually end up happening, and they will come back in 2024 for the event. And then maybe the All-Star Race moves to a track like Rockingham, because Rockingham, they obviously want NASCAR to return there, and they've been trying to get a date back. They haven't raced at Rockingham since 2012 or 2013. So if they can return to North Wilkesboro, they could easily return to Rockingham, and they have been racing in Rockingham, and of course North Wilkesboro coming back. But I think it's just so incredible that this track is back, because a few years ago I thought there was no chance and no opportunity that this track was going to happen, and now it's coming back, and there's also a very strong possibility of maybe in 2024 having the first official Points Cup Series race since 1996. It's just amazing that this is happening. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. I think it's absolutely incredible, and I'm absolutely pumped up to see that this event is actually going to be returning. And just, I'm looking forward to the All-Star Race next week. I cannot believe it's next week. It's about a week from today, and I'm so pumped up and excited to see North Wilkesboro is making its official return to the NASCAR circuit. It's amazing. It's incredible, and I'm absolutely pumped up to see that North Wilkesboro is officially returning to NASCAR. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next major story in today's episode as we are talking about 2311 Racing and the potential for them to bring the third car back in 2023. So in 2023, 2311 Racing has run their third car only once this season, and that was for Travis Strong, who drove the 67 car. Steve Lalletta very recently went on Sirius XM NASCAR radio, and he says that the 67 car could potentially return again in 2023. There's rumors and potential possibilities that Travis Strong could run a couple other races in the 2023 season. Travis Strong, of course, who drove the 6-7 car for 2311 at the Daytona 500, was able to make the field. I believe finished in the top 15 as well. Got involved in the last lap wreck, but he finished in the top 15. There's also a potential possibility that Kurt Busch could make a return to the NASCAR Cup Series in 2023. About a month or two ago, Kurt Busch gave us an update. He said he's still working toward making a return. He said that they do have a third car for the 2023 season, and that if Kurt Busch does get medically cleared, and hopefully that will happen really, really soon, then Kurt Busch would make a return. Steve Lalletta did say there's a very strong possibility that this car will return in 2023. If you want my opinion, I think this car is only going to return for one reason and one reason only. I think that's going to be for Kurt Busch. Kurt Busch obviously still has to get medically cleared. He has not raced since that Pocono race when he qualified. The last race he actually ran was at New Hampshire, where I believe finished in the top 5. Like I said, Kurt Busch does have to be medically cleared by doctors to be able to get behind the wheel of that number 67 car. But I think there's a really strong chance and a really strong possibility that that number 6-7 car will return with Kurt Busch. Again, like I mentioned a second ago, they have to get it medically cleared. He has to get medically cleared to get back behind the wheel of that car. But personally, I think by the end of the season, you'll see Kurt Busch back behind the wheel. Again, it has to be expected that he will make a return. But if Kurt Busch, if he doesn't get medically cleared, what other drivers could get a potential opportunity? What about Carl Edwards? You know, Carl Edwards, he's been back in the spotlight a little bit more. He's going to be at Darlington this weekend doing some coverage for Fox Sports and Stage 2 and will be honored as one of the greatest 75 NASCAR drivers ever. We know that Carl Edwards has been snooping around, especially as of recently, and maybe Carl Edwards, he gets a shot and opportunity to drive for 2311 Racing, especially since a lot of us fans thought that there was a potential possibility that he was going to return. It then became announced that basically Travis Strong was going to be driving that car. But what if Carl Edwards gets a shot and opportunity? I think it'd be really cool to have Carl Edwards back. I know it's been a long time, and Carl has said publicly that he wasn't going to return, but he's been snooping around as of recently, so maybe there's a chance and possibility that Carl Edwards, he gets a shot and opportunity. What about other drivers from the Xfinity Series? What about John Hunter Nemechek? John Hunter is basically the top 20 prospect right now, and there's a chance that he gets a shot in the Cup car next year on a full-time basis if Mark Truex Jr. does decide to retire. Maybe he gets a shot at running for 2311. What about Sammy Smith? Sammy Smith currently drives full-time for Joe Gibbs Racing, and I think there's a chance he could in 2024 make some starts in Cup. What if he gets a shot at opportunity in 2023? I think the door is wide open for potential drivers to get behind the wheel of this 2311 racing car. More than likely, I think if this car, like I said, does return, I think it will be Kurt Busch who is behind the wheel. But it's going to be very interesting to watch and see what happens in regards to this. It's going to be a fun story to watch. I think this car will return in 2023. Steve Lalletta says, don't be surprised if this car does return. I expect that this car will return. If it does return, I think it is going to be with Kurt Busch. We'll see what happens, though, but it sounds like this car is going to have a chance of making a return in the foreseeable future. It'll be definitely a story to watch for sure. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next major story of today's episode as we're talking about Ross Chastain and Noah Gragson. Now, I did an initial video on this on Sunday, but after the NASCAR Cup Series race on Sunday, Noah Gragson and Ross Chastain got into a scuffle that kind of surfaced from an incident that ended up taking place at the middle portion of the race. Ross Chastain and Noah Gragson are battling, I think, around the top 15 or top 20 position, and Ross Chastain made a really, really aggressive move, but never touched Noah Gragson. And Noah Gragson got up in the outside wall and hit it, and Noah tried to retaliate against Ross Chastain. Now, after the race, because of this, and he actually tried to retaliate down the straightaway, but Noah Gragson went to confront Ross Chastain after the race. And he basically said, you freaking doored me. And then after, Noah Gragson grabs Ross Chastain and handles him, basically picks him up and handles him. And then Ross Chastain, after telling him multiple times to stop, Noah kept grabbing him, and Ross Chastain threw a haymaker and hit Noah Gragson. Noah Gragson tried to retaliate and basically hit Ross Chastain after the fact, but he had security guards that were basically there to break up the fight. Now, the big question that came after this fight is, would there be any penalties in any actions for the fight that took place? Well, NASCAR basically confirmed yesterday there will be no penalties and no actions for the fight between Noah Gragson and Ross Chastain. After the fight as well, Chase Elliott basically said that someone's got to do it because a lot of drivers have been frustrated with Ross Chastain. But going back to the situation with the penalties as well, I actually 100% agree with this call. And I said if NASCAR was to penalize him for this fight, I think that would have been a very bad look for the sport and a really, really bad look for the sport. Overall, in my opinion, this is a fantastic decision because fights are a big part of the sport. And you look at the engagements. We already talked about the engagements a little bit in this episode with Twitter, especially with Noah Gragson and Ross Chastain. Everybody was talking about this fight. You have people in the industry talk about this fight. You have people outside of the industry. Hell, for the second time in the last year, Washington got headlines on ESPN. And you look at these two drivers, this is something that NASCAR could do a really good job marketing off of, and this is why they're not going to basically penalize them, and I expect them to not penalize them because they basically are a huge marketing machine, and Ross Chastain has become the marketing machine. And if I'm NASCAR, I am marketing Ross Chastain as much as possible because if we don't market Ross Chastain, that is a big dud in this sport. If NASCAR can market Ross Chastain like they did with Dale Sr. and Jeff Gordon and Tony Stewart and all those guys, I think that would be something that they should probably be doing. And you look at what's been happening with Chastain. Yes, Chastain can be really, really aggressive and really over-frustrated. And again, when I talked about this, Noah Gragson had every right to confront Chastain. Ross Chastain kind of hurt Noah Gragson's day. And no one went to confront him. And I respect Noah Gragson for confronting him because no one else had the balls to go and confront Ross Chastain for the incident. But Ross Chastain basically is not going to take it. He said there's a no-push policy. And Justin Marks even kind of talked about this on SiriusXM that Ross is trying to de-escalate the situation at first, and then Ross kind of started the fight a little bit by throwing the punch. Again, Noah had every right to be upset and frustrated because he was having his best run of the season up to that point. And I really do wish that security would have gotten out of the way. I know that you don't want to have any concussions and anybody get hurt, but at the same token, same time, I would have loved seeing Noah Gragson go there and actually punch Ross Chastain and kind of hurt him a little bit there. It would have been really, really fun to see. It would have been really, really fun to watch. But again, it was really cool to see a fight. We saw such a great race overall, but that was such a big talk about. No one's talking about what happened at the end of the race, really, between Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson. Everybody's talking about Ross Chastain. And it seems like every week we're talking about Ross Chastain. Whether you like Ross Chastain or not, Ross Chastain creates a lot of headlines and creates a lot of storylines as well. So I think that's such a really cool thing that they're doing, and it's so awesome to see. And I mean, it's a great decision to penalize him, but nonetheless, we talk about the fight, and we're talking about this fight still to this day. So very interesting stuff to talk about nonetheless, but I'm glad that NASCAR has overall made the decision to not penalize Ross Chastain for the fight and Gragson for the fight because it would have been a bad look for the sport overall. So really happy nonetheless to see that NASCAR has made the decision not to penalize both drivers because I think that's a really good call and a really great decision, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story in today's episode as we are talking about Zane Smith. Now, Bob Pockrass, we talked a little bit about some of the stuff from the Bob Pockrass article that came out, but Oscar Kaninsky for Sports that put something from that article that basically caught my attention. And it's about Zane Smith. According to both of these reporters, Zane Smith could join Stewart-Haas Racing in the 2024 season if Eric Almirola retires. Now, Zane Smith currently at the moment is a top Ford prospect right now at this given moment. And Zane Smith has been tearing it up in the Truck Series so far. Zane Smith has already scored 2 wins in the Truck Series in 2023. And last year won the Truck Series championship, got 4 wins in that season, and has been very successful in the Truck Series for Front Row Motorsports. We've also seen Zane Smith making select starts in the NASCAR Cup Series. He made some select starts at Front Row Motorsports and also has made a start or two for Rick Ware Racing this season. And while the results in Cup in the Rick Ware car and the Front Row cars have not been really that good, Zane Smith is still the #1 driver in the lower series right now, and I think there's a very strong chance of possibility he is going to be in the Cup Series. But again, it all comes down to Eric Almirola retires. And this will not potentially be the only move that happened for Stewart-Haas Racing. There's obviously a lot of rumors and rumors that Josh Berry is going to replace Kevin Harvick in the 2024 season, take over the Ford car, and that announcement could come within the next week or two, maybe during the Coke 600 weekend is where they're indicating that there's a chance for that to end up happening. And I think that's going to be a great move right there. But talk about Zane Smith going to Stewart-Haas Racing. I think this would be a huge move for Stewart-Haas Racing if he ends up going there. Again, Eric Almirola right now is kind of 50-50 if he's going to retire or return in the next season. I look at this move for the team to bring Zane Smith in. It would be a huge move for the Stewart-Haas Racing organization. I think Zane Smith would actually be very competitive. I know the Stewart-Haas Racing has struggled over the last few years, but they would have a pretty strong lineup going into the 2024 season. And this is the lineup. So you would, of course, have Josh Berry in the 4 car, which would be a great move for that team. You have Chase Briscoe be in the 14 car, which Chase Briscoe, I think a lot of people are looking at to be the leader next year of Stewart-Haas Racing. You potentially could have Zane Smith in the 10 car in 2024 and Ryan Preece in the 41 car. They've got to get the equipment better because the drivers are not the problem of Stewart-Haas Racing, but I think these drivers could really, really help Stewart-Haas Racing get back to where they were in the 2018 season because some of these drivers are going to be veterans. Chase Briscoe is going to be around 30 years old. Josh Berry is going to be in his mid-30s. Zane Smith will be about 25 or 26 if he goes to Stewart-Haas Racing. And then, of course, you have Ryan Preece, who will be about 32 or 33 years of age. But here's other potential possibilities for next year when it comes to, the Ford camp going into 2024. You've obviously got some other drivers in the lower series who could make the jump up to Cup. You've got Riley Herbst, who's been rumored to potentially make some starts full-time in Cup next year, and he could be a candidate for the team, but it sounds like he's not the favorite. You've got Cole Custer, who currently drives full-time for them in the Xfinity Series, and while his results have not been too fantastic to start the season, he's been really turning the corner over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and I think he could be a candidate to get back to Cup in some sort of capacity. Another wild potential possibility, what about Hailie Deegan? Hailie Deegan, she is a big top prospect, I think, for Ford right now, and she's got funding and sponsorship for Monster Energy, very similar to Riley Herbst. She could make the jump up to Cup and make some select starts in 2024, even though I don't think she's even close to being ready to make the jump up, but I think that'd be a really good move for them. And then you got others like Brian Newman are coming back into the sport recently. Jensen Button, he's shown interest. And even Ty Majeski would not be someone I'd count as a possibility for the Ford camp. But I think Ford has kind of set themselves up for a really, really great future. But it's going to be interesting. I think the chances of Zane Smith, though, going to Stewart-Haas Racing on a full-time basis next year, I think they're pretty high. I think Zane Smith has a really good shot of going to Stewart-Haas Racing next year. But again, it all depends on if Eric Almirola retires. And with how much Eric Almirola has struggled in the 2023 season, again, I think he should have retired at the end of last year with how bad his performances have been. Even though I do like Eric Almirola, I think that he probably should have retired at the end of last season. So if you want my honest opinion, I think that there's definitely a shot that Zane Smith goes to Stewart-Haas Racing, and I think there's a really good chance that ends up happening. But we're going to have to wait and see what happens. Silly season is going to get interesting. It's definitely heating up behind the scenes. A lot of teams are planning to make some pretty big moves, and I think some huge things are going to happen here really, really soon in the silly season that you're going to have to watch. So, that is for today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below with that, and comment your thoughts below on today's video. Do you think Zane Smith joins Stewart-Haas Racing in 2024 or not? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about the other news we talked about today, including 2311 potentially having a third car, and also NASCAR not penalizing Ross Chastain and Noah Gragson for the fight? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, I'm going to have a throwback paint scheme. Look at all the throwback paint schemes that have been revealed. There's less this year than last year. Then tomorrow on the channel, I have NASCAR Cup Series race picks for the Cup Series race at Darlington. Then, of course, on Friday, we have a NASCAR news video, and we're going to have the Truck Series race review on the channel as well. Then Saturday, I have the NASCAR Xfinity Series race review. And then Sunday, we're going to have the NASCAR Cup Series race review as well. A lot of great content on the way, and I've got some special projects that are potentially coming out next week that I think you're going to enjoy. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.